All right, let's talk about problems in evaluating cultural factors. So, the factors I'm going to be discussing in this video are peer group, neighborhood and urbanization, ethnicity, social class, and poverty. Let's talk about why it's important to take a look at different cultural forces before going into the other details. So, although it is impossible to become perfectly competent in another culture or researching across different cultures, it is possible to gain a sufficient competency to work across these different cultures. So it's important. So it's our job, and it's the job of the evaluators to understand how a group might perceive or communicate the different views and what the study or research is trying to get. So this is important so that we have quality data. So let's now go and talk about peer influences. So I have a study here talking about peer influences on adolescent decision making. So when students are around different peers, those peers might influence how those students act. And if you're researching, that is going to affect your study. It's going to affect your research. I have a student at the Boys and Girls Club in my after-school program who was recently added to my group. And she started hanging out with a couple of other girls that get into a decent amount of trouble. They tend to act up, things like that. And the other girl, for the first several weeks that I had her in my group, we had no problems, nothing, no behavioral problems, anything like that. And then she started to hang out with different peers, and these peers affected how she acted. We've since taken care of that, but as a researcher studying, that is going to affect your data. So it's important to take a look at the peers, right? That's just a simple anecdote, but that I think illustrates why it's important to look at how peer groups are acting. Which group are you studying? What's the age group? What are the peers? What are they doing? This is going to be important information. And the study here shows that peers are going to act similar, or I don't want to say similar, but they're going to act, the peers around them are going to influence how they act. So that's why it's important to take a look at that. And I think that you as teachers or educators have similar anecdotes to maybe a student that didn't get involved with the right crowd and affected how they acted. Another important cultural factors is neighborhood and urbanization. So depending where you're teaching, where your school is, what study you're looking at, these are all going to be affected by neighborhood and urbanization. So if you're in an urban area, there's going to be it's going to be a lot more compacted than, say, a rural area. Depending on where you are in an urban area, you could be in a very high socioeconomic area or low socioeconomic area. So these cultural factors are going to affect your students. I teach at both at a low socioeconomic area. One is in a rural area. It's more homogenous, and then I teach after school at a more urban area, also low socioeconomic, but it's more diverse, right? So it depends on the neighborhood, and a lot of these students in the urban area moved in from other places around the country, and some people from different countries. So it's going to their cultures are going to affect their behaviors, how they act, and these are things to look at besides what we've talked about earlier in our slides. So the neighborhood that they're from and urbanization is going to affect, and that's why it can kind of cause a problem in evaluating. Ethnicity is another topic of discussion that could be a problem in evaluating cultural factors. So people from different ethnicities are going to have different cultures. I can relate to this at the Boys and Girls Club. This just happened recently. A student, I had to suspend them because they hit another student. And as I was telling, and that's the protocol at the Boys and Girls Club, that's in our bylaws. So I was telling this to the parent. I was gave them the paperwork and said, "Yep, he'll be suspended for 1 day. He hit another student," and the parent kind of laughed it off. They didn't really care and kind of said that she wasn't going to punish him because um, because she teaches him to stand up for himself, and that's just a different than our protocol at the Boys and Girls Club. But depending on which group and your culture, it's going you might teach your kids differently. So that's why that's going to affect. It might be different, and each ethnicity might have a different culture. They might raise their kids in a different way depending on the neighborhood, the family, the ethnicity. These are all going to affect that, and that's just one example I have of how the culture at home was different than the culture at the Boys and Girls Club, and that's why those things might come into combat with each other. And the last is social class and poverty. So that could be tough to evaluate as well, because people are constantly coming in and out of poverty, right? People might change social classes, so these are different things to evaluate, different things to look at with your students with these studies. So, what class are you looking at? Are you looking at a higher class, middle class, or lower class? And these are important to take a look at because it's going to affect how students act.